Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for the intro. Um, I guess the thing I'll start with is that the connection between security and MEV can be a little bit tenuous at times, but I think I found a topic that's kind of in both ballparks, and it's an attack that allows you to front run even when you shouldn't be allowed to front run, and you'll see what I mean when we get into the details here. And I think it's more of a good example of what are the things that you really need to think about, especially when you're designing a trading application like Uniswap v3. And I think this is something that the people who were designing Uni v3 did not know was going to happen or was possible when they designed it. I don't know that for sure, but I'm pretty sure that they did not know that this was possible when they designed it. So in that realm, it's an attack, right? So let's just get into it. Let's start with a brief introduction about what MEV is. Okay. I think it started as what can miners extract through their reordering, inclusion, and censoring of transactions, right? Now we have leaders instead of miners in our proof of stake system on Ethereum. But I think the name has remained the same. Some people have said we're going to call it maximal extractable value. I still prefer miner extractable value. And usually it doesn't just refer to the value that the miner gets. Usually it also refers to what searchers are getting as well, which is a little bit weird if you're new to it, but that's kind of how it's used in the vernacular. And then front running is maybe a bot or something just hits the pool before your transaction hits the pool. And it can make your execution worse, or it can make the execution worse for the liquidity provider. And we'll see how that works. So let me just go over a few. Oh, let me. Did not realize we were not getting the whole slide here. There we go. Let me go over a few institutional details, as they would say in a traditional finance seminar, which is what is actually going on that generates the MEV opportunity, especially for the leader. So here I just have depicted an Ethereum chain, right? And each 12-second slot, there's a single leader who has write access because the leader assembles transactions from the mempool. So they're the ones who get to choose what goes into the block, and they get to choose what order the transactions are in the block. So I'm going to draw a little bit of a distinction between what to include and what not to include, because I have a paper out recently called Censorship Resistance in On-Chain Auctions. It shows that not including transactions can actually also be valuable. Basically, what you're doing, you're like a bouncer at the club. You're charging people cover to get into the block. That's your include, right? But censoring, you can use that to manipulate certain mechanisms on chain. And I think reordering is what we're going to focus on today, which is front running, back running, just in time liquidity, these kinds of things that you can do to hit the market, move the market, manipulate it in ways that make execution worse for either the trader or the liquidity providers. And then I want to talk briefly about proposer builder separation, because this is now what at least 85% of Ethereum blocks are built through proposer builder separation rather than through just the proposer choosing what to put in the block. So the way that PBS works is each slot, a number of builders produce a block. So that's what these little squares are by B1, B2, B3. They produce blocks. They send the block header to the proposer, and then the proposer sends back a signed block header. So it like chooses the one with the highest proposer reward and sends that back signed. And so basically the proposer auctions off their right to be the proposer to somebody else. But whoever wins that is kind of still acting like the proposer would, in that they now have ordering access and they have write access and they can censor transactions that they want to censor. They just have to choose what they want to do before they win the auction, which from like practically is not a big limitation on what they can do. So if they want to censor a bunch of transactions, then that would be profitable for the searcher, for the proposer to do. Then it's profitable for whichever builder wins the PBS auction. Okay, now I'm going to get into this setting of a front-running attack. So we're on an exchange here. P star is the current price. And we have a trader who he wants to buy 6 units of liquidity. So that's depicted in this red hatched thing here. Okay. And if he does that, he's going to move the price by 6. Okay. So the first unit he gets at 1F, the second at, sorry, the first unit he's getting for relatively cheap. The second one is a little more expensive. The third one is a little more expensive, etc. So if he just executes it right on the DEX, he's going to get on average a price of 4F. Okay. And so he's going to set his slippage tolerance to 0, which means he's going to say, I have to get on average price of 4F, 4 fees. Otherwise, my order shouldn't execute. So what does that mean? If my order is at the top of the block and nobody else hits the pool before my order hits, then it should execute. If somebody hits it in the same direction as I'm hitting it, say I'm a buy order and somebody puts a buy order in before me, it should fail without anything intervening, okay? Because then it would be beyond the slippage tolerance of 0. So what does that mean? It should mean that you can't front run, right? Because if you front run and you push the price, then it should mean that the slippage tolerance causes the order to fail. Okay? So this is just the assumptions that we're making about this order. So we can take a look at the attack. And a final assumption, which is kind of a powerful assumption for doing the calculation, but if you removed it, there would still be effects here. We just wouldn't be able to quantify them as easily. We're going to assume that the attacker has unlimited liquidity on an external exchange at P star. So think of maybe Binance or something. There's a lot of liquidity there. They have, the price is P star there. They have some kind of privileged account that has pretty good execution on Binance, low fees, etc., etc. Okay, so the searcher is definitely advantaged over whoever's trading on this DEX because they have much better execution on Binance, right? And we think of kind of the trader here as being an uninformed trader. They just want to trade. Maybe they're a DAO. They want to get out of a certain position or something. So they're just trading on the DEX. Although they're not too uninformed. They're setting their slippage tolerance to 0, which is pretty tight slippage tolerance. Okay, here's an example of kind of what you can do. You almost wouldn't call this an attack. This is a simple back run. If you talk to like some people in MEV, they say this is what we want. We only want back runs. We don't want anything else. What would it look like? Well, you see the trade in red. The red hatch is the trade, right? At an average premium of 4F. Okay. Then the back run happens by the searcher. They back run 5 units, and their average premium is 2.5F. So if we multiply 2.5F by 5, because it's 5 units at an average of 2.5F, that's a 12.5F profit, basically, for the searcher. Because remember, the searcher can go ahead and sell whatever it back runs on Binance or something, okay? So this is a simple background. We haven't hurt the liquidity providers. Actually, we've traded back, so we've given them fees in the other direction too. Here's a second attack that's slightly better. And now we're introducing the idea of just-in-time liquidity. And if you're not familiar with this, it's just calling the add liquidity function and then removing it in the same block. So I guess we'll see it here in more detail, but you kind of add the liquidity execute the trade, and then remove the liquidity. So it's mostly should be helping the traders because it's adding liquidity, so it shouldn't be hurting the traders. But it is hurting the liquidity providers because it undercuts them. And there's this thing that happens in TradFi and high frequency trading where the bots kind of compete to undercut each other, and this actually causes some adverse selection for the high frequency traders. So JIT is kind of like that, where if you're never getting any uninformed flow because it's always getting just in time attacked, you're only getting informed flow, then you're being adverse selected more as a liquidity provider. And so that's what the risk of just in time attacks are. So here's a simple JIT plus background. Okay. We just in time attack with 2 units exactly at tick 8 here. Okay. Now we execute the trade and it doesn't go all the way, right? It just goes until it hits the 2 units of just-in-time liquidity and it takes those instead of continuing on with the remaining liquidity at tick 8 and tick 9. So we have 4 units that we're still taking from the body. So now this is 2 units that we're getting at 5F as the searcher here. And then we're going to remove the liquidity and back run. And we're going to back run 3 units at 1.5F. Okay, so then 3 times 1.5 is 4.5. 2 times 5, 10. Add that up, it's 14.5F. So if I go back, it was 12.5F for the simple background, 14.5F for the JIT. Okay, so we're doing better by 2 fees here. And now we're going to look at kind of the most sinister attack, the JIT plus sandwich. And this is like kind of the thing that I mentioned that I don't think the Uniswap team was thinking about when they designed this. Okay. So remember I said you shouldn't be able to front run because the slippage tolerance is 0. Well, you actually can if you use just-in-time liquidity in the right way. Okay. So if you start by front running 3 units, that's depicted in this red hatched region. Okay. So now we've moved the price to tick 6 from P star. Okay. That's depicted in the second image here. This is what the book looks like now. Okay. Then I add a bunch of just-in-time liquidity, 6 units. Now this is what the book looks like. Okay. So when I execute the order now, it only hits the just-in-time liquidity. Okay. And that just-in-time liquidity is at 4F away. So we didn't break the slippage tolerance parameter. In fact, we hit the slippage tolerance parameter exactly, right? Because remember, 4F was the price they were getting when they just executed the order. And they had a 0 slippage tolerance. So we're hitting the slippage tolerance exactly again, which means the trader is getting the same exact execution as they would have without anything, with the simple background. Only this time, they're only trading into us. They're not really trading into the liquidity provider. So now we're going to remove the JIT and back run 2 units this time. Our back run is going to be an average gain of F. So that's 2 times F. Okay. And we got here, we got 4F times this. That's what we got from our just-in-time liquidity, right? So that's 6 times 4, which is 24, okay? Only we had to subtract the cost of our front run here. we're actually losing money on this front run. 3 times 2.5, 7.5. So we have 24 minus 7.5 plus 2, 18.5. Okay? So that's our JIT plus sandwich. And let me get to the bottom line here, which is what do the results of these 3 attacks look like? I said that the execution is the same in the background. I think my table is. Sorry, this one was supposed to be the JIT plus sandwich attack. So just think of this one as the JIT plus sandwich attack, the bottom one. But anyway, in the JIT plus sandwich, we have minus 24F for the swapper, which is the same execution as the background because we're hitting the slippage tolerance exactly. Actually, in the JIT plus background, without sandwiching, the swapper did slightly better. You can think of this as the execution quality. Closer to 0 is better. That means less of a spread. So they did slightly better with the background plus JIT. And they did the same with the JIT plus sandwich. And then the LPs, right, in the back run, they're getting 11.5F. But in the JIT plus background, they're only getting 5.5F. Because the JIT is coming in and taking some of their lunch, basically. And they're also doing worse when we do JIT plus sandwich. And then the RBot is just getting better and better, right? So the RBot wants to do JIT plus sandwich, but he actually makes the LPs the worse off and makes the swapper no better off. So he's basically just taking money from LPs. And I don't know if you've been following kind of this liquidity provider debate on Twitter. We already think, even without this, that Uniswap v3 LPs are not profitable for the most part, unless it's very specific situations. There's a lot of reasons, long block time is one of them, that make Uniswap v3 LPs unprofitable. And that's not even including this JIT plus sandwich attack issue that is potentially taking even more of the LP profits. I guess I wanted to just, before I move on, answer any questions about the attack itself before I move on to like how to stop the attack, just in case there's any kind of clarifying questions about the attack. Yeah, so the issue is something called loss versus rebalancing, and there's a paper about it by Jason Milanis, who's a PhD student at Columbia, is the lead author, and Tim Roughgarden, who's very famous algorithmic game theorist, is on it, and a couple other people, including Anthony Lee Zhang, who's a professor at Chicago Booth. So they kind of identified an alternative to impermanent loss, which is called loss versus rebalancing. Impermanent loss is comparing the LP returns to a holding portfolio. So that's, you can think of impermanent loss as loss versus HODL, and you can think of LVR as loss versus rebalancing. The rebalancing portfolio is the one that you kind of arb as the centralized exchange price changes. So you kind of rebalance the pool yourself. What happens in kind of a blockchain setting is the arb bots are looking at the centralized exchange and rebalancing the pool according to whatever price that is, because they have good execution on Binance, say. So LVR is like, how much are you losing relative to if you could be doing that with your own bot? Okay. And it turns out this is a big deal. The more the price changes, the more you lose to this arbitrage bot who's trading against you and rebalancing the pool for you. And how do we tie that back into block times? the longer the block time, the more the price can change. And I guess it wouldn't matter because we're not adjusting the prices at all, so we're just leaking it all to arbitrage bots anyway. But if you had a shorter block time, you could maybe try to do some kind of strategy where you adjust things. But the long block time just means that the price moves more over the 12-second period than it does in 100 milliseconds or something. Probably 100 milliseconds would be the ideal block time that we could get to. Probably can't go much smaller than that. So yeah, basically trading is a high frequency game on Binance, and it's a 12-second game on Ethereum, and that's why LPs lose a lot of money. Cool. Any other questions about the attack itself, or I will get into how do we stop this? What can we do to stop it? Okay, let me get into it. So I think the first thing is set tighter slippage tolerance, obviously, but we already set it to 0, right? So this is a little bit troubling because I mean we could set it negative, but then if it's not worth it to attack, then it won't even be executed at all, right? So that's not great. But potentially we could see negative slippage come in at some point here. This is a big one that you should probably be doing if you're trading a large order, is break it up into multiple orders. This has a couple advantages. If you break it up into multiple orders, I guess I'll get to that. This is just my outline, so I'll get to the specifics of breaking it up in a bit. And we can change the JIT logic. There's a ton of ways to do this. I have like a big slide on this. And then the last thing I'll talk about is order flow auctions, which is what I've been working on a lot in my own research. And I think it's bigger than just this question, but it tackles a lot of how do we kind of make this better for liquidity providers and for traders. So let me talk about this. I think I already talked about this a little bit, but if you set your slippage tolerance tighter, then you get more failed transactions. And that's obviously undesirable, right? You're trading for a reason. You want to trade. You want your transaction to succeed, and you particularly do not want it to fail on chain because then you pay the gas and it doesn't do anything. Okay. So I think this setting tighter slippage tolerance is like there's only so much you can do. And it's in TradFi, we would kind of think of this as just setting your strike on your limit order. And there's not much wiggle room. We solve for the optimal thing that you can do, basically. So it's not like you can just be strategic here or anything. We just solve the optimal one, and that's what you should put for your goals. So there's no way we can just solve it with this because we are always running into the tension of tighter slippage tolerance is more failed transactions, right? Okay. So now we're talking about breaking up the order. If we spread the order over multiple transactions, we can take advantage of background liquidity. So we trade a small amount and then we get background. So that refills the orders near the price P star. Then we can trade into them again. So our average execution price is closer to P star, which is good. And it also means that each individual order isn't moving the price as much. So that means we can basically each individual order doesn't move the price as much, so it's less profitable to attack. Right. Um, and there's always this gas cost that comes in for the searcher attacks here, and the attack has to be more profitable than the gas cost for it to make sense to do. So the more orders you break it up into, the more times they have to pay that gas cost to front run it. So if you do 10 orders, then they have to pay 10 times the gas cost. Unfortunately, this also means that the trader has to pay 10 times the gas cost, right? Because they have to do 10 swaps. But it doesn't necessarily always have to be this way. There's some proposed solutions where the trader wants to trade a large order and it automatically gets broken up over time, like a TWAM, time-weighted automated market maker. So you can maybe mitigate the gas cost that way. Okay, this is one there's been a lot of discussion about, not as much recently, but kind of started by CowSwap. There was a lot of, or CrocSwap, not CowSwap, sorry. There was a lot of discussion about this. Um, so what would we like to do? If you go back to the attack, the problem was just-in-time liquidity being far away from the current price. So we would like to force the just-in-time liquidity to be as close as possible to the price P star as we can. Unfortunately, remember that we can front run before we just-in-time attack. So it's not as simple as just saying it has to be in the next tick or something, right? Because we can always front run, move the tick, and now the next tick is where we want it to be, right? Um, so maybe there's something that you can build that looks like an RFQ system where the just-in-time attackers are competing on closeness to the price P star. In other words, they're undercutting each other in some sort of auction that looks like an RFQ system. Now, there's some speculation that this is what Uniswap v4 is going to be. This is like very much a rumor. I think I've only heard it from 2 people, and it might be not true, but I think this is the only thing that I've heard, which is actually a rumor about what Uniswap v4 might be, is a solution for JIT, or at least something that tries to make JIT work a little better. And then I think the nuclear option is just get rid of it altogether. Just say if you put liquidity in, you have to leave it there for 5 blocks or something. That's the CrocSwap mechanism. You can do something similar. The faster you withdraw the liquidity, the more penalty you have to pay, right? And that kind of compensates the liquidity providers. But I think this is maybe too much. This is maybe too zealous against just-in-time liquidity. There's cases where just-in-time might provide better execution. It's unclear whether that's true. I think that's an open question. If anybody is interested in MV research, the question of whether just-in-time might provide more liquidity in equilibrium is open. So go ahead and work on that if you're interested in it. But yeah, so I think we could get rid of it altogether, but that might be losing a valuable tool. But maybe better safe than sorry, because LPs are already pretty unprofitable, and this is potentially a way that makes them even more unprofitable. And the fourth strategy is the order flow auction. And this is the one that's my personal research that I've been working a lot on. I have a paper out on censorship resistance and on-chain auctions, which is kind of about topics related to this. But the basic idea is you can auction off the right to do whatever you want to the transactions, and the auction's proceeds can compensate for front-running attacks. Okay. At first glance, this seems like it maybe doesn't solve the problem right away, because remember we said that the trader isn't getting worse execution. But you can also auction off the right to interact with a pool, for example, or add liquidity to a pool or something like this. So there's a lot of things that you can auction off as part of the order flow auction. And if you want to kind of auction off the right to arbitrage a pool, you could do that. And I would almost consider that part of an order flow auction. And the proceeds from those auctions can go and compensate the liquidity providers for what they're losing, right? And then if you auction off the exclusive right to execute an order, it gives whoever wins the auction more leverage in the PBS auction. Okay, that's a little bit unintuitive, but if I give my valuable order to everybody, and then they all have to go bribe the proposer to include it, the proposer is the one who ends up winning because the proposer has kind of this one-to-many market, right? He's the only one who can include the transaction, but there's 10 of you with valuable transactions that you want to include, and only one of you can include it. So what's going to happen? The auction is going to take place, and the proposer reward in the PBS auction is going to be high. But if we limit the order to only one builder, then the proposer reward is just bilateral bargaining. What do we mean? One versus one bargaining, which is much better than one versus many bargaining if we want to limit the proposer's revenue. So if we think about one thing we might want to do is make a situation where you can give your order not to everybody in the mempool, but just to one person. And then in order to do that, you auction it off and you can take the proceeds from that auction and use it to make your execution better. So, I mean, your swap might be slightly worse, but you got, 0.1 ETH or something. So the 0.1 ETH makes up for it and makes your execution better. The last thing, I think auctions are difficult in decentralized environments. These things right now look like a centralizing force. And part of it's because of the natural way that if you have private order flow, you have more leverage against the proposer in the PBS auction. And so there is probably going to be a centralizing situation going on where private order flow means more profits for builders. And then they take those profits and they reinvest them in getting more order flow. For example, they might give rebates to their users if they're a wallet or something. And this causes them to get more order flow, more private order flow, causes them to be even more profitable. And eventually the limit of this system is a few very powerful builders with a lot of private order flow. So that's something to worry about with these order flow auctions. But at the same time, we have a system that's currently pretty broken for swapping. So this is something that does solve a lot of the existing problems. It just maybe introduces some new centralization ones. To be fair as well, the validator market is already pretty centralized. Right? Like about 30% of nodes are Lido and 25% Coinbase or something like this. So it's already pretty centralized there. And then the builder market is even more centralized than that. So in some sense, it's already a pretty centralized system in the MEV space. Anyway, that is all I had for the talk. So the just-in-time attack, I think, is first pointed out by Alex. I don't know if he's the first to point it out, but he wrote a really nice thread about the just-in-time plus sandwich attack that you saw. And that's what I based the graphics off of that you saw, explaining the attack. The Croc Swap white paper talks a little bit about how they stop just-in-time attacks completely, and then definitely censorship resistance and on-chain auctions. I just put that there because I want everybody to check it out and understand what we're talking about in terms of MEV is really about censorship, not just ordering. Even though we've talked about a lot of ordering today, but censorship is also really important as well. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I hope this was security focused enough for you guys. I know that there's some other stuff that is really interesting, but not as security related, I would say. And I will say that the order flow auction space is really heating up. lately, and there's a lot of research going on. And so if anybody here is interested in research, that is kind of the area that is going to get a lot of attention, I think, in the next year if you post a Twitter thread about it. So there's a question: what are your favorite places to learn about MEV in general? Um, and then the follow up is people Twitter blogs. Uh, yeah, I think Twitter is definitely one of the best places, and I think Alex Neslobin, who wrote the original thread on this attack, that was my inspiration for this, is a very good follow. He talks about this kind of stuff. Um, Definitely, I mean, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, follow me, especially order flow auctions on Twitter. And I talk about this stuff quite a bit. And there's a space tomorrow with myself, Alex, Malesh Pai, who's a professor at Rice. Alex is or was a professor at LSE. I think he just quit to start a crypto startup. Alex was a professor at LSE. So there's a space tomorrow with Alex, Malesh, myself, David, who's from EF, I think, and Yuri from BlockSwap. And we're going to be talking about high frequency trading in blockchain. And so if you really want a good answer to the question of why 12-second block times make LPs worse off, then definitely tune in tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific on a Twitter space. The five of us will be talking about that. And those guys are all a great follow. And I think generally, like, the threads happen, you can kind of see, like, there's about 20 people who comment in them, and all of those guys are a pretty good follow. Blogs, I wouldn't read too many blogs. I think, as with other places in crypto, there's just a lot of, like, fluff. So I would stay away from Medium and stuff like this, unless you're really gung ho about it. It's kind of like searching through the jungle for treasure. Papers, definitely you should read some papers. There's a lot of kind of papers coming out about this recently. But you have to also be selective with those as well. So if you follow the people on Twitter, they will retweet the papers and talk about them a lot. And then you'll know which papers to read. Sorry, I think that this is an area that we can improve a lot as MEV researchers, is places to learn about MEV, because I think it's pretty opaque right now. So front running exists. So the front running effect is just without the JIT. That exists on every DEX. The cool thing about this attack is the trader set his slippage tolerance to 0. So we shouldn't expect that front running is possible, but it's actually possible thanks to JIT. JIT is an attack that only exists on concentrated liquidity. I mean, you can do it on a regular Uniswap V2 pool. Your cost of capital is going to be huge to do it there. You can do it though. I mean, you can flash loan and do this on a Uni V2 pool. It just so happens that I guess you can't really flash loan it because it's split between, you have to add liquidity and then execute the user transaction and then remove the liquidity. So it's hard to do a huge thing on a Uni V2 pool where you need like $600 million of liquidity to do this. On a Uni V3 pool, it's very easy to do because the liquidity is so concentrated that you can just put it all on a single tick and then overpower everybody else who's on that tick. Kind of like you see here, like, it doesn't take that much liquidity to have a lot of liquidity at, I guess I had a better picture somewhere, right? This one, right? Like, it doesn't take that much liquidity to be way deep on a certain tick. Whereas on a Uni V3 pool, if you want to be just in timing that, you need like 600 million of money, and it's hard to flash loan it because you have to put the user transaction in the middle. So uh, I think this is not that widespread right now, even in practice, even on Uniswap v3 either. So not a lot of people using just-in-time attacks. Uh, but we will see more of it. It's just a matter of time, I think. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me leave with a final thought about this, which is even though this looks like the swapper isn't any worse off, and they aren't any worse off on this one trade from this just-in-time attack, if you look at the long run, the second order effects of this, LPs are less profitable, which means they provide less liquidity, which means that swappers actually end up worse off in equilibrium, right? Here they're the same execution, but what happens is this drains the liquidity on the pool. Makes it much less desirable to be a liquidity provider, and then the swapper is going to get worse execution down the line. So definitely something to think about when you're thinking about these attacks is not just who does it affect, because you might not really care about LPs that much, but how does it affect the equilibrium on the protocol, and does that affect everybody? And I think it does. It might even make the ARB bots worse off because they drive out the liquidity and they don't make as much money on the ARB. So even though in the individual case they're better off, the overall equilibrium of these things can make everybody worse off. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun to put together, and hope you guys enjoyed it.